Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of CleanTechies, the podcast. As always, sponsored and made possible by Next Wave Partners. I'm super excited to be able to introduce this podcast to all of you. It's something I've wanted to do for a while, taken a while to get everything put together in the background. I appreciate the patience for those of you who know that this has been coming. But what my goal here with this podcast is to just have conversations with people in the clean tech space, whether that be uh, carbon tech or clean agriculture, specifically, or electric vehicles. There's so many subsectors: water, sustainability, built environment, all of these things. But having these conversations to help bring awareness to people who are not highly familiar with what clean tech is and what's being done in the space. I also want to be able to highlight entrepreneurs and what they're doing to try to help them accomplish their goal at a quicker pace. And just to really bring light to this revolution of clean way of living and building things and doing things. So I'm very excited to introduce this to you. And in today's episode, the first episode here, I spoke with Steve Heckeroth of Solectrac, who has a pretty interesting background in clean agriculture, specifically clean tractors and electric tractors. And he's been working on innovating in this space for a long time and has run into so many obstacles with the opposition from conventional ways of doing things in industrial agriculture, but he's finally starting to get a lot of traction, no pun intended. And we had a really great conversation, kind of covering a lot of topics, kind of on a relatively high level. But again, very excited to introduce this show to you, and I hope you enjoy my conversation today with Steve Heckeroth of Solectrac. Thank you for joining me today, Steve. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time. This is our first episode here. I really appreciate you joining me. I appreciate everybody listening. So just to give a background to everybody listening, what we're doing here with Clean Techies, the podcast specifically, is to have conversations with people like Steve to help the average person understand more about clean tech, clean agriculture, climate tech, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of really, really interesting things happening in the world as we're all kind of becoming more aware of our footprint and what we do, the CO2 that we're emitting. And there's a lot of people like Steve who are inventing ways to try to help reduce that and change it. So I appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today. I guess, Steve, did you want to give us kind of a brief background about yourself and kind of maybe where you came from and then how you ended up getting onto this path?
Yeah, I was born and raised in LA in the 50s. It was had the worst pollution of any place in the world at that time. It was before there was any emission controls on cars, and sometimes you couldn't see across the street and your lungs would actually burn when you breathed. I ran track and cross country along a freeway, pretty much destroyed my lungs. And I decided there had to be a better way to get around and get energy than burning fossil fuel. So I started doing some research on it. And the very first Earth Day in 1970, I helped organize it in my campus. And I dedicated my life to finding alternatives to burning fossil fuel. So I've been at this for 50 years. A little over 50 years.
Yeah.
And I was educated as an architect. So the first 25 years I spent sort of perfecting the design and building of passive solar homes that at the end I was actually producing more energy than they used. As soon as photovoltaics came on board, I then worked for the largest thin film photovoltaic manufacturer in the world as the director of building integrated photovoltaics. So you wouldn't have to use any real estate, any land. All you did was use roofs. And I did designs and installations for hundreds of building integrated installations. And then in 1990, the California Air Resources Board came up with what they called the zero emission mandate. And that said that by 1998, 1% of the cars sold in California had to be zero emission. And I got really excited about that because I think at the time, and I think still, the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions and pollution is cars and trucks on the road. So I started building electric cars, started a company, and borrowed some money, and I found that I had to find the lightest car possible, and then at that time, all there was lead acid batteries. So you find the lightest car and then fill it with lead, and that was the way to get a long range. I found the Porsche Spyder replica kits and bought them without engines or gas tanks, and put half a ton of batteries in them. And I got a 100-mile range, and they went 0 to 60 in 8 seconds because all the torque of electric motors. And I was having a good time with that, but I was really disappointed about the problem that battery weight caused. I mean, having half the weight of the vehicle be battery weight. So I saw this at a county fair. I saw this cement block on the back of a tractor, and all of a sudden this light bulb came on. That tractors were the ideal electric vehicles because they need weight for traction. And you actually, when you buy a tractor, they sell you weights, and you put those on the front bumper. So they're heavy too. So I came up with a patent for exchangeable battery packs. So and I put for 3-point hitch on the front and the back, so you can exchange battery packs. If you've got a heavy implement on the back, you can put the battery weight on the front to balance that weight, or if you have a loader in the front, you can put the exchangeable battery in the back, and it gives you a lot of extended run time. So that's what got me started. That was 30 years ago. I started building electric tractors and pretty much focused on that. And at that time, up until about 5 years ago, I was the only one in the world doing it. And now some more tractor companies. We just had a conference call with one of the largest tractor manufacturers in the world this morning. So it's starting to get some traction.
Yeah, nice. That's amazing. What are some of the challenges that you've run into? I mean, obviously, as you've indicated, you were essentially the first mover in this space. So what are some of the challenges that you've run into and you've maybe seen less resistance to now that things have kind of started to progress with clean energy and clean technology in general?
Well, the biggest challenge, of course, comes from the oil companies. The zero emission mandate was shot down by a lawsuit from the Western States Petroleum Association and the California Manufacturers Association. They put $60 million in a fund and did negative advertising, and they sued, GM sued the state of California, and then the Bush administration joined that suit and pretty much killed the whole program. So they pushed back the introduction of electric vehicles about 20 years. And that, the things like Exxon knowing about global warming and how greenhouse gases affected global warming back in the 80s, and showing how it was going to be a problem, but then realizing that was their bread and butter, and just putting out disinformation. So the biggest issue was disinformation, and how to get the word out that actually electric tractors were a good solution. The battery weight was an asset. Electric motors have maximum torque at 0 RPM. They have very little noise and no pollution. So they're an excellent alternative all the way around, not even considering the environmental. Um, there's a lot of safety and health issues involved too. So
Yeah, I think that's obviously, I think part of the whole reason of this podcast is that the people, many people aren't aware of, the other opportunities and what really exists. I know, coming from a farming background myself, with a lot of my relatives being farmers, when I had originally spoken with you, it was super super insightful to hear what you had to say, and kind of the ideas you introduced me to about clean farming. And that's kind of, what I'd also like to discuss at some point here is, what is the impact that you can make, and do you have the stats off the top of your head of, what the carbon emissions are from tractors, or, maybe what do you see that you can help reduce through, the success of what you're trying to do here?
I think agriculture is probably the one thing that can turn everything around, because, the reason there's oxygen in the air is because plants grow and they take in carbon dioxide and sunlight and water, and they sequester carbon in their roots, and they put out oxygen. And that is a 3 billion year process that turned this planet from a dead, lifeless body into someplace that could support life. And that 3 billion year process, we are now turning around in about 200 years by digging all that carbon up that had been sequestered, that allowed the oxygen to be in the air and the climate to be somewhat, 15, even 20 years ago, you could buy a farmer's almanac and it would tell you what the climate was going to, what the temperature and what the climate was going to be like throughout the year. But now that's no longer the case. We have bigger hurricanes, bigger snowstorms, bigger droughts. The oceans are dying off. There's all kinds of things that are happening because we're putting that CO2, that global warming gas, up in the atmosphere at such a tremendous rate. And so plants are really the answer. They're the things that made this planet habitable. But yet, the way we do agriculture, it produces about 8% of the greenhouse gas emissions. And if we did agriculture in a regenerative way, where we did not harm the soil, we did not poison the soil, and we allowed plants to grow on the soil all the time, typical large industrial farming just eradicates all life in the soil, with, they called it the green revolution. I call it the toxic revolution, because it's when they started using the herbicides, pesticides, and chemical fertilizers instead of the old organic methods in cultivation. But if you can run in the same wheel tracks on row crops every year, that's the only place you compact, and you can leave the soil, that the growing space, totally untouched, and all the worms and all the good bacteria and all the things that support plant life stay alive in that soil. The difference between that and what you see on the large farms, where they have to rip the soil because of the compaction with the heavy tractors, then they till it and they disc it, and then they bed shape, and then they plant and they spray their poisons, and they're just using the soil as a just a medium for growing plants, and trying to give the one plant, the monocrop that they're growing, the best chance, and get rid of everything else. So with that kind of a system, we're causing more CO2 emissions. If we go to a more regenerative system where we're protecting the soil that we're growing in and keeping the plant growth on it all the time, cover crops, and then go immediately to your crop, plant right in the, when you mow the cover crop, you just plant right in that mulch and just keep going. You harvest, then you cover crop, and you leave things growing. The ground should always be green, and when it is, then you're producing oxygen, and you're putting the CO2 back in the ground. So if we do agriculture right, we can reverse climate change. And that's one of the few things that can actually do that. So agriculture can play a huge role in reversing climate change.
Yeah, so if you were to break down kind of the components of industrial agriculture and how they're hurting the earth, like how they're creating all of these emissions, what are some of the ways that if you could just walk us through those major factors and see how can we do this differently? How can we change the way we farm to a smaller scale with the supply chain and all of those things to make it a more regenerative farming method?
Yeah, well, first off, it's the long supply chains that service those mega farms, those industrial farming. They have to, the resources that go into those, when you used to pump the oil out of the ground, it came out and then you refined it and then you got it to the gas station. But now we're starting to mine tar sands. We're fracking to get natural gas to melt the tar sands. And then we're piping it all the way across the country. And so by the time it gets into the fuel tank of your tractor, that's only a small part of the emissions that are going into the atmosphere, because it's that whole supply chain has emissions at every step. CO2 is produced in every step of that fossil fuel supply chain. And most people think, well, they used to measure fuel economy as though the gas magically appeared in the gas tank. Well, that's not a reality. And it's becoming less and less reality, because the low-hanging fruit, the easy sources of oil that used to just come out of the ground, now we're mining for oil, the oil shale and the tar sands, and going out in the ocean and drilling down 5 miles. Those are all things that take way more input. So by the time you include all those CO2 emissions, maybe 10 times the emissions that you actually produce when you drive the tractor. So it's a huge, it's becoming an increasing problem. And then what they're having to do to stop the pollution on tractors is they're putting all these emission controls, which make the tractors less efficient. So when you make something less efficient, you produce more CO2 emissions. They're getting rid of the particulates, which is good for people's health, but they're producing more CO2 emissions in the process. So the great thing that's happened is now solar photovoltaics are the cheapest source of energy. They're cheaper than any other source of energy. So we can use photovoltaics to level the whole playing field. Right now, if you have oil, if your country is oil rich or has a good oil infrastructure, you're set, you're a rich country. If you don't have oil, you're a poor country. And that's just the way it is. But with solar energy, you can put up a solar array anywhere in the world and be farming the next day, because your solar array can charge your tractor. So it's not dependent on all that infrastructure and supply chain of the fossil fuel industry. And even the auto industry is changing really rapidly. I don't know if you follow Tesla, but their market cap is larger than all the rest of the auto industry put together. So there's a really rapid change happening just in the last 2 years, and it's accelerating now that we have somebody who believes in science in the White House. That's going to make a huge difference, and somebody who's appointing people to special climate change committees and setting up whole departments to study climate change and find the best solutions, and saying that by 2035 there's not going to be any more internal combustion engines. Even GM is saying that now. They're not going to produce internal combustion engines by 2035. So the switch is starting to happen, and because solar is the cheapest form of energy, and it can be put in any place where food grows when it's sunny. So it's an ideal combination. You put out your solar array, you have your electric tractor that's powered off the solar array, and you can provide food security where now people are struggling just to feed their families. You give somebody a good gardener a tractor, and they can feed their whole community. So because it just increases your efficiencies that much.
Yeah, could you talk about a little bit more about I think we had chatted about this in the past, is larger tractors versus smaller tractors, and kind of the methods used to farm locally and have a smaller community grown type of farm. I remember you had put me onto the that documentary called Kiss the Ground, I believe it's called, on Netflix, and they discuss a lot in there. They go over how we need to shift our mindset from industrial farming to this local supply chain, supplying our local towns, and making sure we're taking care of the soil, not turning it to dirt. But could you talk a little bit more about that? What can some of the people listening maybe do, or at least look forward to, or advocate for in their local towns and local communities to help create this future where we have clean agriculture?
Yeah, in Kiss the Ground, the best example is where they grow these monocrops in the Midwest, and then they have feedlots, all spread all over the world, and so they're shipping, corn and soybeans and stuff that cows shouldn't really even be eating. They're made to consume grass. And what the Kiss the Ground says, let's just turn it back to the prairie the way it was. The buffalo roamed the prairie, and everything was in balance, and they didn't have to grow food and then ship it all the way across the country to a feedlot where they have to give the cows, antibiotics and everything to keep them alive, because they're walking in their own manure all their life. So it seems like it should be obvious that the further away you are from where your food is grown, the more pollution you're causing, the more energy is used. So what I'm advocate for is farmers markets, community, small scale farms. So we can put a solar array in a small community, and it can power not only the farm, but also the tractor can be used as a mobile source of power to power a clinic or a school. So they can charge it with a solar array and take it over for disaster relief, all kinds of things. But that kind of a small scale solar community, people can walk to get their food. It doesn't have to be, shipped thousands of miles and then delivered to a distribution center, then delivered to a grocery store, and then you got to drive to the grocery store. you have a small community. Like Europe has green belts around their towns because they were pre-auto, so they have natural boundaries around their small towns, and in those green belts is where their food is grown. So the food is very close. It just is around the town and comes into the center. You have farmers markets. There's farmers markets in every town, and that I think is going to be the solution, along with solar leveling the whole playing field, so there's not rich, wealthy fossil fuel countries, the countries that have access to fossil fuel. When you have solar distributed throughout the world, then everybody's on the same footing. It's a great equalizer.
Yeah, and I mean, not to mention I'm assuming there's a very large component of the food that's grown in this more responsible way is also better for us, correct?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, the the large industrial farms, it's all herbicides and pesticides and chemical fertilizers. What kind of food do you get out of that? I mean, it's tainted. It's not healthy. Um, but if you grow it with organic methods, you're completing cycles that need to be completed. You know, and the Native Americans had no word for waste, because waste is really only an invention of modern civilization. When you know, every when you complete the cycle from food to eating the food to putting the waste or the, you know, your byproducts back in the soil, then you're completing a cycle. One thing is a nutrient for the next thing. And when we flush it down the toilet, it ends up in the river where it is a pollutant. But if we were composting and taking care of all what we consider waste and organic matter and putting that back on the soil, instead of using chemical fertilizers, compost is an amazing soil nutrient because it's just completing that nutrient cycle.
Yeah, understood. I guess one thing maybe what I'd like to kind of wrap the podcast up with is, especially for any entrepreneurs maybe listening to this, what is your advice to people who are trying to build something and try to truly make an impact on the world rather than just making a successful business? What is your advice to people going into this? Obviously, you've had a pretty exciting career as far as the entrepreneurial ventures you've taken. So what would your advice be?
Well, it's kind of tenacity and not giving up. You know, if you think you know how to solve a problem, then just don't give up. You know, people come up to me now and say, gosh, you're just in the right place at the right time. And I say, yeah, it only took me 30 years. So
Exactly.
it's like you gotta keep with it, and you gotta do what you believe in. You're never going to be successful if you're working at something that you don't truly believe in. And the passion has to show through in order to sell something to somebody. So just follow your passion and make sure it's something that makes the next generation better. And I don't think you can lose.
Yeah, I think that's great. I appreciate the advice, Steve. I think a lot of people listening will enjoy it too. So, I think that's everything for today. Thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast, Steve. I really appreciate it. Is there any specific resource that people can go to find more about as you continue to grow Solectrac?
Well, our website is www.solectrac.com. We're going to be at the World Ag Expo next week, virtually. So stop in World Ag Expo, and we're going to have a demo and a seminar, and we'll be open for I think it's a 3-day time, and then they're going to keep it on virtual all year long. So there'll be a lot there, and we're doing a lot of podcasts. I was just on doing an interview with the Wall Street Journal this morning, and then we had another podcast a little later on with another clean tech forum. So word's starting to get out there. People are starting to get excited about making the future better, and I'm really happy it's finally happening.
Yeah, it's definitely an exciting time, and it's very inspiring to meet people like yourself who've been pushing the boundaries for a long time, and finally, you've obviously put in a lot of work with um, a lot of challenges, a lot of stumbling blocks along the way, huge organizations trying to push back, and you've kept pushing forward, and I think it's starting to pay off. So we really thank you, people like yourself, for doing this. And we definitely look forward to mass production of your electric tractors so we can start to change the way we farm. So thank you again, Steve, for coming on the show. We will probably see you again.
Okay.
Thanks so much, guys, for joining on today's episode with Steve Heckeroth. Obviously, a great discussion, kind of a high-level overview of clean agriculture and what he's doing. Obviously, he's worked quite hard to get to where he is. So I appreciate you taking the time today. A couple things I want to mention is, please do, if you found something specifically interesting or still had questions about something, please comment or at me on Twitter at Silas Maynor for your questions, maybe future guests you'd like to see. But again, please do follow and like. If you're interested in being involved further, we have a CleanTechies community that we're creating. We've built on Slack, and we're growing to help connect other people in the clean tech communities, climate tech, all of those different things, to foster these conversations, maybe hiring discussions, getting funding. There's all kinds of ways that this can be helpful to many, many people. So please do join that, link in the bio. And again, we look forward to seeing you next time. I'm excited to announce that on the next episode, I will be discussing carbon tech with Apoorv Sinha of Carbon Upcycling Technologies. Super excited for that one to come out. But if you have any questions, you know where to reach me. Thank you, and see you next time.